Story 1. The tree-line figure in Oregon's WO last autumn in a cold, dense October. My two closest friends, Liam and Chloe, and I planned our annual apple-picking trip. Instead of a brightly commercial orchard, we chose Fogwood Orchards, an older, lesser-known estate famous for its heirloom apples near Portland, Oregon. The place lacked the cheerful bustle of the impending Halloween season. It possessed a distinct, isolated, and slightly ominous beauty. The atmosphere shifted the moment we turned onto the gravel road leading to the farm. While other orchards basked in the bright autumn sun, a thick, chilling, opaque white mist clung persistently to the ground and the tree trunks here. The Fogwood apple trees backed right up against a deep old-growth pine forest, which locals called the Mute Woods. The forest entrance was marked by a rusty barbed wire fence and a faded sign: nitrogen monoxide trespassing, nitrogen monoxide hunting. This very isolation and mystery were what drew Liam in. Ever the most reckless and skeptical of the group, he had driven over 2 hours specifically to visit this place. "Heard the woods have a history," Liam murmured as we bought our picking bags, his eyes glinting with a mix of challenge and excitement toward the mist-shrouded tree line. "Unexplained disappearances. They talk about a hunter's curse out here." Chloe, the pragmatic and anxious one, zipped her jacket higher. "Liam, stop. They're just old stories to add atmosphere. We're here to pick apples." Yet, I noticed even Chloe's voice lacked conviction. As if she were trying to convince herself more than us. We ventured into the orchard. Initially, it was pleasant. The scattered laughter of other families, the satisfying crunch of footsteps on dried grass, and the sweet aroma of ripe apples mixed with the scent of pine. But Fogwood was vast. By the time we reached the 15th row, the noise had completely vanished. Swallowed by the profound silence of the adjacent forest. Our quest was for the dusk apple, a rare heirloom variety so deeply red it was almost black, rumored to grow only on the oldest trees situated closest to the forest line. "Come on." "You cowards," Liam challenged, pushing open the loose gate that separated the orchard from the final tree line. "The perfect apple, the biggest and reddest, has to be on the other side. It'll make a fantastic ghost story for Halloween." He led the way, his boots crunching on the thick carpet of dried pine needles. Chloe and I reluctantly followed. This was where the sunlight was completely extinguished. The area was at least 10 degrees darker than the rest of the farm. The weak light filtering through the ancient pine canopy created shadowy streaks that looked like long, skeletal fingers. The air smelled different here, not just pine, but mold, decaying earth, and a strange, metallic, briny scent I couldn't quite place. We found the tree. It was so old its trunk was twisted like a spasm of pain. And, as anticipated, high on a branch was a darkly red, almost black apple, the size of a man's fist. It practically glowed in the gloom. I reached up, my fingers mere inches from the apple. That was when Chloe let out a tiny, strangled gasp, not a scream, but a sound choked off by pure terror. Her hand clamped onto my arm, her nails digging painfully deep into my skin. Did you see that thing?" Her voice was barely a whispered, trapped breath. I turned, thinking she'd seen a wild animal. I looked over her shoulder, and instantly, a cold, sickening, primal dread rushed down my spine. About 25 meters inside the dark border of the forest, standing between two immense pine trees, was a figure. It was impossibly tall. I estimated it to be at least 12 feet high. It was unnaturally gaunt, a terrifying blend of a sharp cross and a forgotten scarecrow. It was not a tree, nor a stump. It was shrouded in a dirty, grayish-white material, like a tattered ceremony gown soiled by mud and tree sap. It was motionless, but its posture was what turned my blood to ice. It was slightly tilted toward us, not from instability, but in a deliberate act of observation. Its long, skinny arms dangled near its knees. If it had a face, we couldn't see it, but the feeling of a pair of invisible eyes staring at us was undeniable. Liam, His skepticism, finally crushed by sheer horror, could only swallow hard. He tried to speak, his voice failing him. It has to be a stripped tree or an early Halloween prop by the owner. Chloe didn't listen. She was backing away, muttering, "No, trees don't stand like that. That's not a person." I quickly snatched the apple, an act of sheer reflex. It was cold and heavy in my hand. "Let's go," I hissed. "Now." We turned our backs, trying to maintain a semblance of composure, walking as fast as we could without breaking into a run, as if doing so would draw its attention. Every step was torture. The silence of the forest was no longer peaceful. It was a silence that stalked us. I couldn't help myself. I turned for a first glance. The figure was still there, motionless, tall, and slightly closer than before. I could make out the gaunt shape more clearly. It didn't look like it was made of organic material. It resembled a skeletal frame draped in shadow and withered white linen. I whipped my head back, my heart pounding against my ribs. "It's closer," I breathed out, my voice more of a whimper than a word. Liam turned to look. He froze. The second time I glanced back, that was when the true, chilling horror set in. The figure had closed that blurry distance impossibly fast. It was now about 10 meters from its original spot. There was no sound. No snapped twig, no rustled pine needle. It hadn't walked. It had seemed to glide over the ground, a motion that defied physics. It was like a cutout photo that had been instantly repositioned closer in the blink of an eye. "Run!" I screamed, my shout tearing through the stillness. We bolted. The sound of our feet slamming on the dry pine needles was like gunfire in the enclosed space. We were past the point of trying to be quiet. We sprinted through the final tree line, back into the apple orchard. Behind us, just as we cleared the old barbed wire barrier, I heard a sound. It was a loud, echoing crack, like an ancient branch breaking under an unseen weight. It wasn't a footstep. It was more like an announcement. We didn't stop until we reached the crowded parking lot. The sound of human voices, car engines, and bright lights was an immediate, overwhelming sedative. We turned for one final look, staring intently at the forest border. The figure had stopped. It stood right on the tree line, at the very edge of the apple orchard, as if an invisible barrier prevented it from crossing, or a dark rule it wasn't allowed to break. It just stood there, tall and terrifying, its gaunt silhouette stark against the dense pine trunks. It watched us get into the car. Inside the car, the three of us were silent for several minutes. Liam, who always had to talk, took a shaky, deep breath. "My God, I don't think that was a Halloween joke. I saw it move." Chloe only nodded, her eyes still locked on the rearview mirror. We agreed, without needing to say it, that we had been stalked by something inexplicable, something whose existence defied all logic, and it knew we were there. Story 2. The Mumbling Alleyway Stalker. This chilling event occurred when I was 11 years old, in the 6th grade, in a quiet but aged suburb of Chicago, Illinois. It was the autumn of 1998, and for the first time, I was experiencing the solitude of a child post-divorce. My parents had recently separated, and having moved in with my mother. I was walking home alone after school. Most of my friends stayed for clubs or took private buses. My school was a standard red brick structure, but across the street stood a row of old, dreary townhouses. The most notable was a 2-story house on the corner, so old the paint was peeling. The windows were grimy, and the roof looked slightly sunken. It was the perfect place for us kids to spin ghost stories about an old witch or a lurking killer. My route home was singular. It required passing the porch of this notorious, rumored house. Everything began in the second week of October, when the leaves had turned brown and the air carried a sharp, metallic chill. As I walked past the house one Tuesday afternoon, I felt a heavy gaze settle on my back. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity and unease finally won. I looked up. In the second-story window. The center one was a figure. It was tall, indistinct whether male or female due to the distance and the dim light within the house. The shape stood absolutely motionless, perfectly still like a cutout statue. It seemed to be looking straight at me. My heart gave a hard thump, but I tried to rationalize it. Just a curious owner, I told myself, speeding up my pace. Maybe they just moved in and are checking out the neighborhood. However, it persisted. The next day, as I passed, the figure was there again. And the day after. Always in the exact same window, the same position, perfectly still, just a dark silhouette in the filthy frame. It never waved, never moved away, never raised a hand. It simply stood, like an object placed there specifically to observe. This constant feeling of being watched started to wear me down. I briefly considered taking a detour, adding 10 minutes to my walk, but then my fear was met with ridicule. "You're being paranoid, Sammy," Mark, a classmate, scoffed. "It's probably just a tree reflection. Or someone trying to get an early jump on scaring people for Halloween." I wanted to believe them, but the anxiety settled in my stomach like cold fog. The figure wasn't a reflection. I had looked long enough to know it had mass. One afternoon, I decided to challenge it in the most childish way. As I passed, I lingered for a few seconds and pretended to tie my shoe, glancing up. I stared directly at the window. The dark shadow remained. This time, I imagined I could feel a cold draft, an intense focus emanating from the aperture. I noticed a chilling detail. The window was cracked open slightly, just enough for the house's absolute silence to absorb any noise from within. I ran. The situation climaxed the Tuesday before Halloween. I was walking down the sidewalk with my practiced, false air of calm. When I was about 30 meters from the house, I looked up out of habit. The second-story window was empty. A brief surge of relief washed over me. They're gone. They finally left. Then I looked down. A tall figure stood on the porch, blocking the walkway at the bottom of the rickety wooden steps. It was the same figure I had seen in the window, but now it was closer, clearer, and far more terrifying. It was a man. He was gangly and tall, wearing an oversized, tattered, heavy coat and an old wool cap that obscured most of his face. The most frightening thing was his posture. He was watching me, standing perfectly still, his arms hanging loosely at his sides. I tried to keep my composure, kept my gaze lowered, and continued walking, taking a wide arc around the porch. The moment I crossed the house's boundary line, the unimaginable happened. The figure suddenly moved. It wasn't a walk. It was a lunge, a clumsy jump off the porch steps onto the sidewalk. Though he was awkward, his speed was astonishing. My shriek of terror was swallowed by the cold wind. He wasn't just walking. He was chasing me. I broke into a desperate, full-speed sprint. I was a skinny 11-year-old boy. He was a grown man with a long stride. I heard his labored breathing behind me, the slapping sound of his shoes on the pavement. And he wasn't just running. He was yelling. It wasn't a clear threat. It was a stream of incoherent, unintelligible mumbling, disjointed sounds, like someone trying to articulate a personal horror in a non-existent language. I knew I couldn't outrun him on the open street. Immediately, I darted into a dark, foul-smelling alleyway between a corner store and a dry cleaner. There was no escape, but it was the only place to hide. I squeezed behind a large steel industrial dumpster, the smell of stale food and chemicals hitting my nose. I held my breath. I heard his footsteps halt right at the alley entrance. Then came the silence, broken by the mumbling. He was talking to himself, the disjointed words now closer and clearer. Slow, deliberate footsteps entered the alley. He was looking for me. I could hear his heavy, ragged breathing, the slight swish of his tattered coat as he brushed against the walls. I curled up, shaking uncontrollably. Hot tears streamed down my face. I prayed desperately, "Please don't look around the dumpster. Please don't look around the dumpster." He came closer, his mumbling now sounding like a distorted prayer. The climax of the tension was one long, immeasurable moment. And then, suddenly, the mumbling stopped. The footsteps turned and ran away from the alley, just as fast as he had pursued me. I waited for 10 more agonizing minutes, paralyzed by fear, until I was certain the coast was clear. Then, I ran all the way home, not daring to look back. When I relayed the entire story to my parents, my father, who was visiting, immediately called the police. The next day, my mother called me into the living room, her face pale. The police had delivered a chilling detail. The house had been vacant for years. It was a foreclosed property with no tenants. No one lived there. They hypothesized it was a mentally ill homeless person or a squatter. Yet for me, who had seen that mysterious silhouette standing motionless in the second-story window for days, this fact only compounded the horror. The mumbling stalker had been sneaking into the house, or worse, had always been there. Since that day, I have been haunted by old houses, dark hallways, and especially empty second-story windows. I still wonder, if he was homeless, why did he stand motionless at the window without moving for days? Story 3. The Hide-and-Seek Clown Encounter. This whole ordeal took place in early October, when the scorching heat and heavy humidity of New Orleans still lingered, but the damp, cold chill of the night began to crawl up from the marshy areas. My 3 siblings and I, Jess, the eldest and always cautious, Mike, the mocking and reckless one, and Eli, the youngest at 7, easily frightened, were visiting our mother at a low-income apartment complex called the Bayou Flats. The complex was nestled beside an old, abandoned industrial area, and the main path led through a long, dark concrete alleyway that constantly reeked of sewage, marsh mud, and mold. Due to its isolation and shabby appearance, it was considered a scary area, perfect for ghost stories. On our very first afternoon, we befriended 2 neighbor kids from downstairs, Zach and Chi-Chi. We quickly immersed ourselves in the typical adventurous life of neighborhood kids, exploring every hidden corner. As twilight descended, Zach, with a mischievous glint in his eye, proposed a terrifying game, hide-and-seek outside after dark. We play by the old warehouse area. "It's pitch black back there. The streetlights don't reach," Zach said, his voice a stimulating whisper. "Awesome. It'll feel like we're being hunted," Mike said, excited, rubbing his hands together. Jess immediately protested. "It's too dangerous and wet. Mom won't let us." "Just one round, Jess," I intervened, intrigued by the idea. "There are 6 of us. The more the merrier." In the end, excitement overcame Jess's caution. We all agreed to start at 9 p.m. The darkness fell rapidly, bringing with it the sickly yellow, faint glow of the distant streetlights, creating an eerie, almost palpable atmosphere. Exactly at 9 p.m., Zach became the first seeker. He leaned against the old utility pole, starting his countdown from 100, his voice echoing unsettlingly in the open space. We all scattered. Jess and I, the older ones, quickly bolted toward the back of the apartment building, an area accessible only by going deep into the longest, darkest alley. This alley was a narrow corridor, bordered on one side by the apartment's crumbling brick wall and on the other by the metal siding of the abandoned industrial lot. At the alley's dead end were 3 huge, steel industrial dumpsters, towering over our heads and reeking of sour leftovers and damp rot. It was the perfect hiding spot. Too far, too dark, and too foul-smelling for Zach to ever want to search. We squeezed into the tight, spider-webbed space between the last dumpster and the brick wall. I could feel the cold dampness of the brick seeping through my jacket when Zach yelled, "Ready or not, here I come." The game officially began. At first, the silence was tense. We could hear the faint rustling of dry leaves beneath Zach's feet somewhere far off. But after about 15 agonizing minutes of thick silence, boredom began to replace fear. The stench became unbearable, and I started feeling a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. "Maybe we should quit," Jess whispered, her breath cold against my ear. "It's too late, and I don't like this silence." "It's not the silence of the night. It's a stalking silence." We agreed. We would forfeit, declare defeat, and go back to find the others. We carefully squeezed past the dumpster. Stepping back out into the middle of the alley, my heart suddenly dropped, as if I'd just stepped off a cliff. A cold, primal dread immediately set in. Standing at the mouth of the alley, about 30 meters away, where the sickly, faint yellow light from the distant street lamp barely reached, was a tall, unusually rigid figure. Initially, I thought it was Zach waiting to scare us, but the figure was too tall, and its posture was unnaturally stiff. The person's hair cast a large shadow over their face in the dim light, but I quickly recognized the hair, a large, frizzy, multicolored mass, bright red, electric blue, stark yellow, definitely a clown wig. An intense wave of fear washed over me. Not just because it was a strange man, but because it was a clown, an icon supposedly meant for fun. Now standing still and menacing in the damp darkness of the alley. The strangest part was that the person just stood there, completely motionless, as if cemented to the concrete floor. He didn't wave or approach. He simply stared at us. Jess yanked my arm hard. "Go back, don't look," she whispered, her voice strained, filled with panic. We reversed course, trying to walk quickly without making noise, searching for the others. We found Mike and Chi hiding underneath an old pickup truck. We quickly pulled them out. "There's a strange man," Jess gasped, pointing toward the alley mouth. "He's dressed like a clown, and he's standing there, completely motionless." Mike smirked. "You guys are making stuff up. It's probably a mannequin." "No," I retorted, my voice shaking. "He's too tall. Let's go look, but we have to stay here, where we can still see him from a distance." We all peered around the corner of the shed together. The clown was still there. That was when the situation became much worse, escalating from a scary prank to a genuine threat. As we watched, the tall clown began to move. His movement was slow, almost unnervingly fluid, like a puppet being drawn by strings. He took one step toward us, then paused. Then he raised a long, white-gloved arm and waved at us, a slow, teasing motion, almost mocking our fear. Now, we could see his face more clearly in the slightly better light. It was painted entirely black, with no features emphasized, no red smiling mouth, no rosy cheeks. Just a vortex of darkness covering his face, as if he wanted no human feature to show. His eyes were the only thing visible. They glittered unnaturally, reflecting the streetlight, and they were fixed on us. Just then, Chi, small but with the best eyesight, screamed in sheer panic. "There's another one. Another one is watching us." She was right. A little further away, just outside the alley, a second clown had appeared. This one was shorter, skinnier, with a shocking green wig and seemingly longer than normal legs. He wasn't motionless. He was moving slowly along the boundary of the parking lot, cutting off our escape route. We were cornered. Two clowns were now coordinating their presence in our dark game of hide and seek. "Run." Back to the apartment, Mike roared. Chi and Mike bolted toward the main apartment stairwell. I pulled Jess, and we ran after them, our footsteps echoing loudly on the concrete path. We burst into my mother's apartment, locked the door tight, and gasped for air in the living room. There, we found Eli, who had hidden in the yard. He was sitting on the sofa, trembling and recounting his story to my mother. Eli had hidden beneath the wooden porch steps of a nearby house. He heard footsteps very close, but not at ground level. When he slowly looked up, a painted face with large, yellowish eyes was staring down at him from above from the second-story balcony of that house. He was right above my head, leaning over the rail. Eli stammered. He just stood there, didn't say anything, just stared. My mother finally believed us after Eli's testimony. She quickly drew the thick living room curtains and double-checked all the locks. After we calmed down, my mother tried to settle us all for the night. I lay on a makeshift mattress in the living room, staring up at the heavy curtains. It wasn't until around 2 a.m. that exhaustion finally dragged me under. I woke up thirsty. The silence of the apartment was now broken by a strange noise just outside the living room window. Scrape. Great. Tap. It wasn't the wind. It was an uncanny sound, like something rubbing against the brick wall right outside, slow and deliberate. The window was on the second floor, over 20 feet above the ground. There should be no such sound. In a moment of childish folly, driven by fear and morbid curiosity, I slowly pulled the curtain aside just a sliver. I was face to face with the same clown Jess and I had seen in the alley. He was there, on the second floor, right outside the window. His dark face and glittering eyes were mere inches from the window glass. He wasn't smiling. He was staring at me, an empty, expressionless, yet intensely violent gaze, as if peering into my very soul. I could clearly see the grotesque contrast between the pale skin around his eyes and the dense black paint. I screamed, a small, choked sound, and scrambled toward my mother. When my mother flipped on the lights, grabbed the phone, and ran back into the living room. He was gone. The police were called but found nothing, except small scratches and a few smudges of dirt on the exterior brick wall, too minor to confirm anyone had scaled it. Without a ladder, I never found out how he climbed to the second floor. I never found out why we were targeted. Since that night, I have hated playing hide-and-seek in the dark and have been paranoid about any alleyway. Clowns, to me, are not symbols of fun, but the embodiment of inexplicable stalking and darkness in remote places. Story 4. The Kneeling White Robe in the Cold Night. This story is more than a memory. It is a psychological scar burned into me, originating from a secluded village in Poland, where the ancient oak and pine forests are not just natural beauty, but a curtain concealing something old and deeply unnerving. Autumn here is not just cold. It is isolating. It slows time and amplifies the sense of solitude. My habit of walking Susie, my 40 kilograms shepherd mix, at 8 p.m. was not a pleasure, but a necessity. Susie was a fierce creature, a living defense mechanism, and her presence was my only comfort on the unlit roads. Quickly enveloped by the early October darkness, my route was consistently the short, graveled path connecting the sparse residential area to the church grounds. This road lay between two worlds. On one side was the sprawling, well-secured Konushny farm, home to prized horses. On the other was the Forbidden Forest, a solid black wall of trees with no buffer. The most ominous junction was a large, overgrown patch of land where the old, dilapidated parish barn stood. It had been abandoned for years, its wooden fence rotten and listing, forming an unkempt buffer zone between our tiny bit of civilization and the endless wildness of the forest. This area always carried a sense of heavy, stagnant dread, as if time had stopped on the damp soil and decaying wood. That particular night, the air was dense with bone-chilling cold. I was walking, my mind drifting, hearing only my footsteps and the metallic clinking of Susie's chain leash. We passed the horse farm, and then approached the old barn grounds. At that exact moment, Susie instantly petrified. She stopped, not because of a noise, but because of an abnormal silence she perceived. Her ears pricked up, her yellow eyes, reflecting the distant streetlight, became sharp and utterly focused. A deep rasping, guttural growl tore from her throat. It was the ultimate warning sound, a rare fusion of instinctual rage and primal terror. She did not bark. She growled continuously, directed straight at the barn grounds. I strained to see through the blinding darkness. I saw nothing but black tree trunks and dense shadow. I tried to calm Susie, yanking the leash, but she resisted, her claws digging into the gravel. Then, I looked harder, focusing on the very edge of the forest, where the darkness didn't completely swallow but merely blurred objects, and I saw it, about 15 meters inside the boundary of the lot, where tall weeds grew among the thick pines. Stood a figure. The material was white, illogically white, almost glowing against the black backdrop. It wasn't ordinary cloth. It looked like a ceremonial robe woven from moonlight and mist, thick and heavy. Sweeping the ground, the true horror came not from the presence, but from the figure's posture. He was kneeling, not casually kneeling. This was the posture of absolute worship or profound penitence. His back was rigidly straight, as if braced by a steel rod, his head slightly bowed but not slumped. I could make out his long arms placed forward, seemingly holding a small, dark object on the ground. Like a prayer book or an offering, the figure was completely motionless. He did not twitch or shift weight. His stillness was the most terrifying thing, a stark contrast to Susie's increasingly frantic growling. The figure exuded a sense of cold concentration, as if all his energy was channeled into the act of prayer, or the waiting for a sign. A wave of sickening cold ran down my spine. This person was not a vagrant. This person was performing a ritual on the boundary of civilization and the wild. Susie strained at the leash, and I knew I had to act. If I ran, I would confirm myself as prey. If I stood still, I would be a witness. I chose the fake calm of continuing my walk. I used every bit of my strength. Hugging the opposite wall of the horse farm, my eyes locked straight ahead. I used my body weight to drag Susie, practically lifting her. Every step was a test of nerve. I felt the white figure staring at me, not with eyes, but with an invisible, heavy, palpable presence. That 15-meter distance became an insurmountable ocean. It was only when we passed the derelict barn, when the church's architecture and its brighter lights appeared, that I dared to look back. The white figure was still there, still kneeling, motionless, unchanged, as if he had already become part of the landscape, carved from marble and mist. I dragged Susie into a sprint toward the church and didn't stop until we reached home, locking ourselves securely behind the heavy door. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the image of that blank stare, and the unsettling contrast between the holy robe and the dread it evoked. I no longer felt safe, even inside my own house. Around 1:30 a.m., a single, sustained, loud fire siren tore through the rural silence. It was followed by the wail of several police car sirens. The intense red and blue lights illuminated the night sky, flashing frantically through my bedroom window. The next morning, the horrific news was confirmed. Around 1 a.m., the old parish barn had been completely destroyed by fire. The blaze must have been intense, as only ashes remained. The official hypothesis suggested teenagers or a homeless person. But I knew the truth. I had seen the person who brought the destructive fire. The most chilling aspect was the timing. From 8 p.m. when I saw him to 1 a.m. when the fire started was 5 hours. Did he kneel there the entire time, performing a protracted ceremony, using the time to psychologically and physically prepare for the arson? The white figure was not randomly insane. He was a person of iron will and clear intent. His stillness was patience. His posture of prayer was a silent vigil, waiting for the perfect moment. I realized my tremendous luck. If Susie hadn't growled, if I had run, if I had shown fear, would he have abandoned his ritual and turned his attention to the two moving creatures? If he was willing to burn down a religious property with such cold patience, he was surely capable of far more terrible violence. That kneeling white figure, silent, unmoving, praying before its coming sacrifice, remains the most dreadful image of the stillness before the storm I have ever witnessed. I never look at a white robe without feeling an inexplicable chill run down my spine.